Welcome. I'm Paul Whitkay. When I founded the Alliance in 1996, I believed the world was at an inflection point with the internet and globalization just beginning to take off. At that time, I believed that by enabling CEOs to come together and discuss their most impactful and complex challenges in safe, private environments would help all of us learn faster, make better decisions, and act with more confidence. 27 years ago, or 27 years later, actually, I believe we're at another inflection point. The pace of innovation has been exponential for the last decade, but the breakthroughs in AI and COVID causing us to learn how to use virtual communications and learn how to work differently and forced us how to work in different ways actually offers every company and every industry the opportunity to transform the way we work. Over the last 3.5 years, I've had a front row seat to work with CEOs who lead companies in virtually every industry of every shape and style, and now around the world. And I get to see how each of these CEOs deals with these new challenges and opportunities. And we are in a period of global experimentation. No CEO I have has figured it all out, at least in my estimation. It's a dynamic time. The new tools we have to work virtually and in person are things we're experimenting with. And these are times when we must come together to share not only our problems and challenges, but how our own initiatives are working, how they're not working. And together, once again, I think we'll learn a lot faster and hopefully be able to move more swiftly and more effectively. So a couple of months ago, I was talking with Stuart McFall, who I've known for a long time, and he's a brilliant marketer who's worked with a lot of amazing companies. And he made a comment about the hybrid work, and frankly, we kind of realized that we weren't able to go back to work in offices for about a year or more after COVID hit. But now it's been a couple of years of experimentation. And people are starting to get some real strategies and some clarity in how they're organizing their workflows and working with their employees and the communications, the culture, and how it's changing. So we decided it was a time to bring leaders together and start sharing what's working, what's not working. So I decided to invite our distinguished panel of leaders. They come with experiences and perspectives that range from 100% virtual and remote to as fully in person as possible. And after our panel conversation, we're going to break into small groups. Everyone will have the opportunity to discuss unique challenges and learn from what leaders are doing and have an interactive conversation, because nobody has a perfect solution yet that will last forever. We are learning. So I've asked Stuart to moderate this session today. So let's get going. Stuart?
Great. Thanks, Paul. My name is Stuart McFall, as Paul said. I have a San Francisco-based marketing agency called Stuart McFall Associates. And since 1998, when we were started, we've been fully virtual. Today, I work with early to mid-stage companies around the world to help improve their value and valuation, and look forward to working with them as their new business models start to unfold. I'm going to ask all the speakers to take 30 to 60 seconds to introduce themselves one by one, telling us your name, company, and your work model. And let's start in alphabetical order with Bernard.
Thanks, Stuart. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Bernard Cooley. I'm the CEO of Pliant Therapeutics, which is a pre-commercial stage biotech company, NASDAQ listed, about 8 years old, located in South San Francisco. We have about 160 employees right now. And in terms of work model, we are close to 100% physical, so in person.
I think, Chris, you might be next.
It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I'm Chris Shipley. I am an independent actor in the world, an author with Heather McGowan of a couple of books around the future of work and leadership, and a fundamental thesis is that the kind of leadership skills that brought you to the pandemic are not the skills that you will need taking your teams out of the pandemic. And so our book, The Adaptation Advantage, in 2020, talked a little bit about leading among the exponential change that was facing the market. It became kind of an accidental guide for leaders in the pandemic. And now the empathy advantage, talking about leadership styles and the need to relate differently now to a workforce that has been transformed by the pandemic. So I'm happy to, delighted to be here. I love topics of culture and leadership and building effective teams. So delighted to be here today.
Thanks, Chris. And Everett?
Hi, I'm CEO and founder of a company called Trust. We do complex software for Fortune 1000 and large state and federal agencies. We were one of the companies that helped fix healthcare.gov back in the day. We've been remote since 2011 when we started the company, and so we have a decade of work of practices. I'm based in West Oakland, but we have people in 35 states all around the country.
Great. Thanks, Everett. Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jess Yuen, and I'm an executive coach and advisor to CEOs and leaders at VC-backed companies. And I've served as a people advisor for Y Combinator's growth program and as well as Felice's ventures. I'm fully remote and have been since pre-pandemic and based in Sunnyvale, California. But I work with leaders who are at companies of all of these various all across the board, from fully remote to mainly in office cultures, and have seen the evolution over time around that. And I think, so many of our leadership challenges do involve people and the complexities that come with them. And as a former chief people officer, I think bringing that perspective to bear around leadership and culture is always it's a tricky one, because people are complex and there is no one right answer. But I'm so excited to be here today. I think the very first kind of presentation I saw from a client about the future of work and return to office was in spring of 2020, about 6 weeks after we went into shutdown. So it's been a few years of thinking about how does the evolution of this work and change and continue to change. And this week continues to highlight how challenging our roles as leaders are in light of what's happening in Israel, and how do we approach that. And so I think, the last few years has just been one thing after another of something new, a lot of volatility, a lot of ambiguity, and no playbooks that have yet been kind of proven out on how to deal with it. So excited to dive into this topic further with y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mike.
Morning, everyone, or afternoon if you're in Europe. I'm Mike Slesser, CEO of FormFactor. We're a company also listed on the NASDAQ. They've been around for about 30 years. We're a provider of hardware for testing and measurement in the semiconductor industry. About 700 million annual revenues, a little over 2,000 people deployed worldwide, although our major footprint is really California-based. And so we have what I'll broadly generalize as a hybrid work model, but it's very different for different locations around the world and for different functions in the company. So we think about it as a great big matrix with different options depending on what your job is and where you are.
Great. And last but not least, Stan.
Hi, I'm Stan Schneider. I run a company called RTI, Real Time Innovations. We are a software company, about 300 people. We do software for intelligent, real-world things. Explain that if you like. We have employees in 25 states and 7 countries, have a sort of unique model where you can work in the office full-time, you can work at home full-time, or any mix thereof. We request employees to be in the office 5 weeks a year. Not in days a year, so they can live where they like, but they have to show up in an office at least. They don't have to come to all of them, but the whole idea is to get together and turn the offices from a place to work with sporadic or incidental interaction to a place to interact with incidental work.
Great, thank you. So whether we're talking about physical, virtual, or hybrid, I think we'll all agree that today's workplace feels like the cards we've been dealt have literally been thrown into the air and we're playing a whole new game every day. So from employees refusing to come into work, even on their start days, to quiet quitters, to employees being engaged with work in ways we've never faced before, such as the new head of HR for a client of mine who was interviewing candidates completely by text. True story. We're facing multiple challenges for making work for both employers and employees. So I have a question that I'd like each of you to ask, and I'm going to start with Bernard. In this new model, what are you doing to keep employees really engaged? And I'm starting with Bernard because, Bernard, your workplace was named one of the best places to work in 2023, if I'm correct.
Correct, yes, at least here in the Bay Area. Yeah. I think we did as part of that nomination. I mean, the way it goes, you enter into kind of a competition, and it's a survey, basically kind of a pulse survey that is organized by the San Francisco Business Chronicle, I think it is, where we have no input in terms of the type of questions that are being asked, and it kind of covers basically work, career development, snacks in the in the break room. Everything is being covered from a employee engagement, but also experience perspective, with a strong focus on HR specific topics. And on average, I think we were close to 90%, a little bit over 90%, satisfaction. I mean, there is a certain factor that they give, and it's basically, are employees satisfied with where they work? Would you recommend this place to work to your friends and things like that? And so yes, I mean, this was a major achievement, at least I thought, because it was taken, the survey itself was early 23, right? So this is kind of coming out of the pandemic. If we look at all the different responses we got, it gave us a good idea about what we were doing right and what wasn't kind of going right. Actually, we could split it up by different departments, and it was clear that there was quite some spread between certain departments, like G&A was super happy, and some others where that there was a little bit of turnover, for example, you start to see what was actually happening. And so that has helped us a lot. I think the 95, I mean, we are like close to 95% physical in person, right? Right now, we require people to be here 3 days a week. Department heads can kind of adjust, not necessarily lesser, but more if they want to. So there is a little bit of a difference between that kind of approach between the different departments. But don't forget, we have a large group of people that are bench-based researchers, and so they have to be here 5 days a week. I mean, it's hard to kind of work from home when you are a bench lab scientist, right? And then so it's obvious, and we kept that group coming even during the softer lockdowns that happened here in San Mateo County, because as a biotech company you had this exception and you were allowed to have employees on site. It was also the reason we kept it going, also from that perspective, in terms of getting the office folks back as soon as possible, because it was clear that there was you can't keep part of your group being here physically and then another group working from home 100%. I mean, that dichotomy was hard to maintain. As long as there was a pandemic, okay, but post-pandemic, we had to close the gap again, and the gap was closed, by being physically here present. How do we keep people engaged? Very much, and that's something that came out of the survey, was career development is one of those key components. People need to understand how and it's that standard HR answer, of course, but it's not unimportant. It still remains very important to people that they have a clear path in terms of what their career could look like here, within the company. We have programs that focus around management skill sets and management leadership type of modules that we have organized together with an outside consultant for people managers, making sure that people get trained and then promoted as we, just not based on their technical skills, but also on their leadership skills. We have specifically, dedicated focused resources on both the employee experience as well as the as engagement. Employee engagement falls under HR, and employee experience falls under my chief of staff. which is, it's as wide ranging from, management training to parties, right? I mean, it's like it's the whole spectrum of different focused efforts that you implement in order to keep people engaged and have them developed and that they kind of, coming to work is fun. We finally have a couple of folks that are living remote and still will commute on a weekly basis, and we cover all costs, notably South California. We have a number of people living in San Diego because cost of living is just cheaper, but they will fly over, spend 3 days a week here, fly back. We cover all costs, so that's not an issue. We have actually 2 people that are truly remote, or sorry, 3, one in Kansas City, one in Denver, and one in Idaho, for job specific reasons. So that's not an issue. So yeah, I think we are quite happy with what we have implemented, in order to make it attractive for people to be here and to work here. Of course, biotech is completely different from tech. Biotech is a model that is very much on site, right? Genentech, Gilead, I mean, the big competitors in terms of talent for us have required people to come back to work. So we're not alone.
That's a really rich array that you've got there. Stan, you also were named one of a great place to work. So what are some of the secrets that you have?
Well, we have lots of secrets. I can't tell you about those, but the ones that are public, just with our workplace, we have a unique model. We call it Team Weeks, where we ask people to be in the office for 5 weeks a year. During those weeks, we actually define teams. Like today, we have one of our development teams on a product called Micro, and might have. We have 3 major offices in California, Colorado, and Spain. We run Team Week simultaneously at all offices. All teams go to at least one a year. Actually 2. We have one time a year we fly everybody. We have a mega team week in California. We're still 300 people. It's a lot, but we could fly everybody to California, and then at our headquarters. And then the other team weeks, we fly people out for a week. Because the teams are coherent, they can do their offsites and really bond and get to know things. The other teams also are there. It's an exciting time to be in the office, so our locals tend to show up. We do a lot of, like we have dinners and events and games and things while people are in the office. We do remote style of those all the time, but during Team Week, it's sort of more, focused around real interaction and deep interaction while people are together. So one of many things we do with Great Place to Work. I will give a quick plug for Great Place to Work. It's great to have a scientifically done survey that you can use to improve yourself every year, which is what we use that survey for. It's well done, in my humble opinion. So
that's awesome. Jessica and Chris, you have the luxury of being kind of the outsiders looking in when you're looking at these companies. So here you've just heard explanations from 2 places that are great places to work. Jessica and Chris, your thoughts on what Stan and Bernard are doing? How does this fit into the milieu that you guys are seeing?
Yeah, so I'm happy to dive in first. And I love that we're doing a survey. I love that Stan does surveys. Like one of the quickest ways for, especially for larger groups, to really get a sense of what's going on and what your people need and want is to ask and see what comes back. So I think that understanding and that empathy of where they're at, of really stepping into the shoes and the issues that they're dealing with is one of the first things in a mindset mode to get into when trying to understand where should we go. And when I work with leaders and hear them say, I don't understand what's the big deal or why they're not doing this. It's like, okay, let's take a moment and actually step into why might it be for a moment, even if, it doesn't necessarily change the answer. It helps us to get into that understanding of how do we communicate this or how do we frame this. I want to call out, like, the easiest thing for a company to do is actually to choose fully remote or fully in office, because like then you have, sort of one mode that you're dealing with and a lot fewer variables that you have to kind of manage. But in reality, that's not what's happening. It's harder to recruit that way. It's hard, there's so many other things that come out of that decision. And so this is why we're ending up with most companies somewhere in between on that spectrum, as opposed to choosing one side or the other. The thing that I encourage almost all of the leaders that I'm working with right now is to think about, when you're dealing with change of any kind, how do you re-recruit your employees, right? Anytime there's a big change, they're wondering, is this still the company that's for me? Does this next phase of the organization work for me? And so what they want to be is re-inspired around the mission. They want to have an understanding of how they're being valued and being valuable to the impact of the organization. And so thinking about how to re-articulate that and how to reinforce that is super, super valuable, I am finding, and helpful in just reframing. It's not just, and I think in this environment, I have met leaders who are like, my employees should just be lucky to have a job. We're lucky that this business is still in business, right? And so why? But it's because your employees are sitting there going, yeah, exactly. Why? Why should I be here? Why should I be investing in my time? So we want to be able to communicate that and convey that to them. So there's 5 things that I think about with re-engaging employees. One is clear expectations. It's so hard when things are shifting and changing in the economy, in the global world, in our businesses, in the industries. And yet, how can we be clear about what to expect? And how can we be as consistent as possible in that? There were some companies that I know who during the pandemic said, remote is great. We're forever going to be remote. And stayed that way, and that was great. But was just talking to a leader last week, and their company said that forever remote. And 11 months later is turning around saying, actually, we want everybody here 5 days a week, and you've got 90 days to do that. And that is throwing their employees into a bit of a really complex, difficult situation where they're like, I actually like my job, but you're making it almost impossible for me to stay in it. So I think thinking about clear expectations and the consistency of that, of what can we really promise and what should we say we're going to do in perpetuity versus we're going to experiment with it, those types of expectation setting is really important. The second thing I really encourage is around recognition and gratitude. People want to feel valued. They want to feel that their time is valuable. There's so many other things they could be doing. The pandemic, I think, highlighted for a number of people, like, I want to spend more time with my friends and family and on my well-being. And so, if we're going to be asking them to be as productive as possible, as focused as possible, let's recognize and give them gratitude around it. And in today's environment with budget cuts and headcount reductions, it's hard to do here's a bonus or here's a raise or here's a new title. And so how do we do that in other forms of recognition, whether it's, shout outs during a team meeting, whether it's, in one-on-ones, giving really specific, but, valuable, thoughtful feedback, but really having them feel like my contributions are being seen and being valued. The third thing is around flexibility. And this is hard, especially as a number of companies are asking employees to come back in person because that feels like it's less flexible. And so how can we get creative there? So last week, I was talking to a leader, and in their organization, they were saying, hey, we recognize we had a lot of our employee population who's taking care of other people, whether it's their elderly parents, whether it's children, whether it's others in their lives. And so they created a benefit called Caretaker Days that allows for flexibility for one of their populations that needs flexibility in that in the most significant ways. Another company said, hey, people didn't want to lose that flexibility to sort of get away when they needed to and take a break. And so they have they provide a long weekend once a quarter of the employees choosing where they can make a 3-day weekend out of a Monday or a Friday, and they coordinate across the teams to make sure it's not interfering with major work goals, but just trying to get creative around what does flexibility look like. The fourth thing is around social connection. There's been a lot of kind of surveys and studies to show that if you have a best friend at work or a buddy at work, you're much more likely to stick around. And so how do we start to think about forming and creating those social connections? When we think about happy hours and parties and all this stuff, it's all in service of, how do you make people feel more included, like they belong, that they want to stay? Just yesterday, actually in my alliance group, there was an executive talking about he's stuck around at his company about 3 years longer than he was intending to because he's best friends with the other leaders. Like, it doesn't really serve what he wants to do in his career, but he loves the other people that he's working with and is just having a great time. So a company that I advise, they actually moved from more of an in-office culture to a more remote culture, and they ended up taking a small portion of the real estate budget and turning it towards a small budget for team members to get together. And it's kind of brilliant because if it's outside of a work sponsored event or work planned event, you can access this budget. It just has to be at least two people from the company, and you can go do whatever. You can go grab a drink, you can go play mini golf, you can go to the movies, but and people have been using it in so many creative ways. And then the last thing is around learning and growth, and you know, both Bernard and Stan mentioned how important thinking about career development is. People want to understand, if I invest time here, what does that mean for me? What skills do I get? What experiences do I get? But I just want to highlight that as part of it is there are very expensive ways to do this, but there are also extremely affordable ways to do this. And, you know, I grew up at McKinsey where they pour tons of money into employee development, and, you know, that works and it leads to lots of great results. But I've also been at super scrappy startups where we had no budget for it. And we were saying, okay, let's watch a free TED Talk together. Let's read a free article together and discuss that. And so I just want to highlight, like, if you're in a place where you're like, I don't have budget for learning and development and growth, you know, I'm happy to brainstorm with you. What's the free version of this? Because you can still do it even if you don't have the dollars.
Thank you. And Chris, I would say, having read The Adaptation Advantage and The Empathy Advantage, I think they were both prescient tee-ups for what's happening today. So what are your thoughts on this front?
Yeah, well, there's so many things that have been said already that are, I could spend way more time than I should on any of those topics. So what I thought I might do here is maybe put some context around what I'm hearing is wonderful suggestions, and really they understand, like, you know, every company is different. Bernard's company needs to be on site. Stan's company doesn't need to be on site. Jess has provided a lot of really interesting tactical ideas that I think companies ought to consider. But let's think about the milieu in which all this is happening. Right? The pandemic didn't cause anything, but it's shown a bright light on what I think is this transformation from more industrial, even knowledge economy ways of working to a more human value era, and that where our people are at the center. And we've always said that our people are our best assets. They come up and down the elevator every day. But I don't think we actually treat our people as our best asset, and we don't center on them. And that is fundamentally changed, because what the pandemic did for so many workers was cause them to step back and recenter where work is in their lives. You think about, we would move to a location based on our work, and we would build a community based on our work, and we would send our kids to school or find a job for a trailing spouse or partner because of where we worked. And people stepped back and said, you know, what is the role of work in my life? How does it add value to my life, rather than how do I add value to an organization? And when I do add value to an organization, how do I benefit from that? Now, to begin to work with people in that way, we have to start thinking about our relationships with our people differently. And I think that's understanding. I've heard a couple of times today the comment, when change happens, or when a disruption occurs. Well, let's be realistic. Change is happening daily, right? And so when we say things like, we're going to forever do things, well, forever is a very long time. And the likelihood of today, the shelf life of a forever statement is very, very short, because new change is going to come and disrupt it. So I think, how do we look at creating organizations that center on people, that value the contributions of the humans that are in our organization, that allow them to be fully themselves in a way that taps their intrinsic motivations, so that we don't have to do these kind of carrot stick incentive programs, but rather align our values in a way to a purpose of the organization, to a way of working, to the flexibility that allows people to fully contribute because they want to. And when we can unleash the intrinsic motivation of an employee, that's a superpower. That's that's energy. That's expense you don't have to pay on with bonuses and perks. It's people driving toward a mutual goal and objective in the company. Now, to lead like that, we have to really lead differently. And it can't be this command and control. I'm the boss, I know everything, and you got to do as I say. And I want to see you in the office because I want to see you working. Um, that's what we're seeing people really railing against. What our role as leaders now is not to be the person at the vanguard telling everyone where to go, but to be the coach and the mentor among our people, understanding what is motivating them, what is driving them at work, and recognizing that someone who is working from home may have a different set of motivational factors from someone who wants to be in the office, wants the fellowship of what it means to be coming into an office every day. And that the real equity comes when we can know our people and give them what they need, support them with what they need so they can do their best work for the organization. So, it's a different kind of leadership. It's a much harder kind of leadership because we have to actually get to know the humans on our team. But when we do that, we actually, as leaders, relieve ourselves of a lot of pressure because we're not guessing anymore. We're understanding what our people need, and our job is to deliver the resources they need to do their best work. And it's a different role. It's a different way of leading. It's harder in many ways, but it's so worth it when you begin to move people from a place of, it's, the words that keep coming to my mind are herding cats. So much of leadership is trying to get everybody lined up and moving in the right direction. When you can move from that mode to one where you're seeing a team collaborating and working together because their intrinsic desire to work toward a goal together, it's so much stronger. And I think that's what is our challenge now as leaders, is to understand that we are in a different context, and all the logistics of where does work happen and how many days to be in the office and what should happen when people are here. Those are all important factors, but if we understand the motivations, we understand the context, those logistical decisions, I think, will be a lot easier.
Mike, in terms of getting things aligned, one of the things that your company is recognized for is that you actually have, if I'm correct, a code of business conduct.
Yeah.
And how did that evolve? And then how has it evolved post-pandemic?
Yeah, so the code of conduct, and you can actually find it, I think, posted on our external website. It started many years ago, actually, as a response to people not behaving like the way we wanted them to. So we felt a need, again, at that time we were probably 600-700 people worldwide. But to get the principles of what our values were, how we wanted to behave, how we wanted Form Factor employees to behave with each other, with customers, with suppliers, with regulators, we felt the need to get that written down and super clear. So that represented a set of guidelines. I think there's, in the context of this discussion, there's a lot more nuanced ways of creating expectations for people. And I think Chris's points about really understanding motivation and how you can get the value and allow people to deliver the value that they can provide to the company is a much trickier thing. A code of conduct is pretty simple. And if you go look at ours, it's, there's not many things anybody would take issue with. But as we get to, again, 2,000 odd people worldwide operating in countries all around the world, with different underlying cultures, with different norms of behavior, all the way from, China to the US over to Europe. These are things where, guidelines may be more informal than a code of conduct, are really important in understanding what it means to be a Form Factor employee and what it means to represent Form Factor in front of the industry. So the code of conduct is a nice, simple element of that piece of culture, but there's many more subtle things that really round into engaging employees, no matter where they are around the world, no matter what their job function is, from actually building hardware in a factory all the way through G&A functions like finance, HR, and legal, all the way, to product development, which is an area that probably has been the most challenging for us to really engage people and get what we want out of them in terms of collaboration and creativity. Manufacturing's easy because you got to be in the factory to do it. Finance isn't so hard because it can mostly be done remotely. It's the stuff in the middle that's been challenging from a management and leadership perspective.
Stuart, can I
Thank you.
just double clip,
Yeah.
if I can, on something Mike just said, because I love that you have articulated your code of conduct. Other people create their value statements or their culture statements. And those documents are fantastic for, as I think Jess said, making expectations really clear. But they have to be living documents.
Yeah.
And meaning that I've seen many companies that they go off on their offsite and the executives come back and say, here's what we stand for, here are our values. And they put it in the lobby and that's the end of it. The reason those documents, and I'm guessing the reason why this works at Form Factor and many of the organizations, folks on the call here, is you have to do two things with that document. You have to celebrate when things go right. And we're really good at that part, right? We're living our values. But you also have to sanction when things go wrong. And that doesn't necessarily mean to be punishing, but it means to be very clear that within our organization, we take these code of conduct, we take this culture very seriously, and your behavior, your action is outside the realm of that. So we need to bring you back in. And one of the best examples, I work with an organization called the Unreasonable Group, and the CEO there said, when someone violates the code of conduct or our sense of values, and they are very explicit about it, I bring them into my office and I say, listen, this is on me. I clearly didn't make it known to you how important this is to our organization. So this is on me. You stepped out of the line, and I want to make sure you understand where the line is. And if you continue to step over the line, then it will be on you. And the only choice I will have is to ask you to leave the organization, because we cannot, we can't sanction that kind of behavior within the organization. And in that way, everyone knows, everyone sees that going out of the norm is not within the accepted behavior of the company. And people decide, okay, these are values I want to live, and so I want to work in this company, or these are values that don't align and I want to leave this company. And either is a good outcome. But you have to make those documents, those culture statements, truly alive in your organization, or you end up in a place where you're kind of looking like you're hypocritical leadership that says one thing and does another, and that nothing undermines your authority as a leader more than that kind of that a hypocrisy that leads to a cynicism that leads to disengaged employees.
Could not agree more. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just want to add to Chris. So fabulous contribution. Could not agree more. And I like how you packaged a clear communication around. Okay, you've overstepped your boundaries. I'm taking responsibility. Need to provide more clarity. The other thing I would like to add is that it's also the true role modeling. I see this a lot, that values are, okay, we have values, we declare what they're supposed to be and how we are living them, but then leadership doesn't live it. And worst is if it's a CEO who kind of completely violates what he or she preaches. And I think that's a really important piece here, that we role model what we expect our employees to do. So
such a great point, Petra, because I think also if your leadership can't role model those values or doesn't want to, it's time to relook at the values, because otherwise it's going to be that hypocrisy in your employees' face every day. And that's just going to drive some of them to the point of like, I can't be here anymore. The piece I was going to add to that is sometimes it feels like it could be easier to not say anything, to just let it slide, to just, see what happens. But to Chris's point, then culture gets defined for itself. Culture is the words, actions, and behaviors of a group of people. And so if we let those words and actions, behaviors live on, then our employees just look at that and say, okay, I guess that's acceptable here. And, I think sometimes it feels like silence or ignoring or delaying feels like, okay, we don't have to make a decision just yet. But those are decisions. The decision to delay, the decision to not say, that is a decision of itself, and your employees will take that space and see that nothing's being said, and they will put assumptions in there. And the challenging part about humans is oftentimes the assumptions that get put in there are not the most positive ones. They take it to a place that's far from where you would want it to go. So to the extent that you can help to guide that and shape that and encourage and cultivate in a more positive sense, and the more often that tends to be a more productive path forward.
Yeah, Stan.
Hi, I agree with all of this, although it's easy to hear stories about how the leaders enforce the values, and I don't think that's nearly enough. You don't really have a strong culture until the employees are enforcing the values. And if you're distributed, we've always had a core value of managing by trust in the company. Meaning we don't tell you where to work, we don't tell you when to work, we don't tell you how much vacation to take, we don't tell you when to take vacation, we don't tell you any of that stuff. But that doesn't mean you don't work. It means you're managing your own life and your own work. And if, there's no way I as CEO would know what some people 4 levels below me is doing. You've got to have their teammates and their managers and, encouraging and enforcing the values. And I think that's the real trick with culture. It's not really about leadership. It's about everybody. Leaders can model the way and articulate it, but everybody has to live it.
Stan, I totally agree, but I would also say every employee has a leadership responsibility
Yeah,
to
trigger.
themselves and to also be a role model for their peers again, right? So there is no like, oh, this is only at the hierarchical leadership level. So
I agree.
So
Yeah, we even, part of we call it the STAR metric, our evaluation for employees. We actually rate the leadership of every employee. Even the part-time admin assistant is expected to be a leader. So.
And by the way, that's also an important one, integrating those expectations into the metrics, if into metrics and into incentives and into employee recognition, right? I think Microsoft, so I work with some teams at Microsoft, and it was beautiful to see they have these 3 circles of impact, and one is collaboration. And their bonus is dependent on them, obviously personal contribution, but also demonstrating, and now we're deviating a little bit on the hybrid world, but it's important for the values. So there's a circle of impact where it's like, okay, what did you do to collaborate with somebody else? And what did you do where you used somebody else's knowledge and built on that? Because they're pushing cross-fertilization of knowledge and collaboration, and it's completely systematic integrated in the system. And that's why culture change and transformation has really been happening there. It's kind of being lived across the board. So this doesn't add on.
If I could just jump in with a question for Everett. Everett, what? Everett, it seems based on what I read that you foster a culture of almost radical transparency in your company. And in that radical transparency, that includes salary transparency, I believe. How do you make that work?
We've done it since 2017. The reason we did it, which is important, is equity. Lots of well-intentioned companies say we want to pay all our people equally, whether it's women, people of color, when society and current structures clearly don't do that. However, I'll give you an example. Somebody negotiates a salary that's 5%, 5% a little bit more. And then the 2 people perform at exactly the same rate, get the same bumps up in salary as a percentage. And 5 years later, that gap is increased. Now, what happens when that person finds out that they've been at the same level of performance, but have been paid a lot less? They're out. So we wanted to make sure that we avoided that. So it's been extremely successful. It's one of the best business decisions we ever made. So how we did it in a remote context, and this is sort of the relevance for this group, is we involved employees right from the beginning. The first question, are you going to leave if we make our salaries transparent? I mean, we're just being very plain about it. And everybody said, well, yeah, we'll stay. And one person said, but I'm willing to go game on that. And then what we did, we started to figure out what was the right questions. And then as leaders, made sure to involve people to the extent that we said, we are going to have an answer for you at this date. And then we did, even if that answer was incomplete. Then we went to, well, what do we need to do? Well, we have to fix our systems. Our systems were crap at that time. So we did all the leveling and rubrics and so forth. Yeah, crap is a technical term. And so we made sure that we got feedback from the team at every stage. We even got the team involved with the research. Why? Because we could make sure we didn't have any blind spots or reduce the number of blind spots. Again, from a remote perspective, you might have these meetings in an office and be able to say, oh, we were getting different people's opinion. When it's remote, you have to be much more explicit about, I am taking it in, I'm reporting back, and here's our next step. That's what builds trust over time. So that by the time we actually rolled this out, we did it at an all-hands stakeholder meeting. We always have stakeholder meetings quarterly, one of the practices for being remote. And we said, we are rolling this out. No drama. Of course, everybody looks, right? Everybody's human. And then that's it. Because they were involved in the system the entire time. We were clear about what our objectives were, that an opportunity to participate. And we said, we kept our promises in terms of reporting back. So what's happened since then? That system has grown. That system has enabled us to recruit people all across the country much more easily because we're not competing with the Googles and the Facebook in the Bay Area, for example. And it enables us to allow to document something if we make a mistake. This is another, I think, relevance part for remote is documentation becomes even more important, especially if you're used to a system where you can write all the notes on the whiteboard, etc. Now you have to figure out ways to explicitly project those results out to people so that they can access them, comment on them, give feedback on them, etc. And then you can look back and say what you did. I would say, oh, yes. So when we have a challenge, when we realize that we haven't done something well, we say, oh, our system works. We made a mistake. Here's how we're going to address it. And we're really upfront about it. So that's what the system is. And that's how we did it. Oh, last thing, we know what, from a leader perspective, one of the things that's really valuable about having these transparent systems, because really this is undergirded with, it's not just salary transparency, it's a value of transparency to a lot of what other people have just said. What this enables is better decision-making and more distributed system decision-making. So if we are talking about distributed systems, remote systems, if your decision-making just goes up to the top and that's it, it's kind of losing the advantage of having people be remote. Enabling salary transparency and other transparency systems allow people closer to the client to say, how much will it cost to actually help this client? Well, we know exactly what our costs are because we know what our salaries are. Now we can price our goods, our people, effectively, and we can then manage that over time to see whether we're hitting that. Again, that means I don't have to be involved. I can do other things and other leaders can take that responsibility and accountability.
Well, this sounds like almost like a pleasant surprise that came out of enacting that. And so rather than ask the question of the panel that I think everybody would typically ask, which is, what are the problems that you need to solve? What have been the pleasant surprises you've encountered by the changes that you've had to make? And I'll just throw that question out there and let anybody field it.
I'll take the first one. I think the pleasant surprise has been the extent to which our employees have led change. So I think Stan has a sort of a weekend where everybody gathers. Our folks said, hey, let's do what we call a Trex, where we will pick a city and anybody who wants to fly in can fly in and we work together. We don't have to work on the same thing. And we're like, there's no way we would have come up with that as leaders. And the fact that it's employee-led is huge for our culture, for all the things that people said. The second one, and I'm going to point out sort of the values conversation that just happened and sort of making values and conduct real. We have a Friday all hands. The end of the meeting is called a value shout out. So we have explicit values, 6 values, and 3 practices underneath. And people will say, hey, I want to recognize Stuart for the value of being adaptable because he did this thing last week. Now, we didn't come up with that, but the best thing was that who doesn't like getting shouted out in front of the entire company? Who doesn't like giving that love to somebody in front of the entire company? And as a leader, I get to find out who's doing what and what great things are happening. And then I get to reinforce it, either by a little thumbs up or going personally to them. Hey, thanks. I didn't know you did that. That's great. They came up with it. It's every Friday. It is one of the best parts of everybody's week. And it can be both silly and fun or super poignant and effective. So those are 2 surprises for me.
Wonderful. Any other thoughts?
I think that working from home is addictive. People really love it, at least once they're out of their 20s and wanting to have family life and things like that rather than social interaction all the time. I think a pleasant surprise is how, given the flexibility, people are really trustworthy. If you explicitly trust them, I think they do a very good job doing what they should do. Not that we don't have any problems. I think there are definitely some people who should not work from home. And we do offer office space and things. People can come into the office. Unfortunately, they aren't always the same people, so you have to sort of be diligent there. But I do think that's good. And on the negative side, our system works great. It's not cheap. We fly everybody to California for a big party week every year, and we have these team weeks, and it's cheaper than losing employees, that's for sure. We have very, very high retention rate, but we're investing in that, and we realize we count it as an investment. So, yeah, I just see I like Everett's thing. People hold us accountable. We don't have our salaries transparent, but we do have a fundamental HR thing that we always act as if everything was public, because I want to be able to look you in the face, because there's things you can't tell people, right? You can't tell people, thus and such person isn't working so hard because they have diabetes, or something like that. So there are times when it's very difficult to be, equal isn't fair, but fair is fair, and I want to be able to look everybody in the eyes and say, hey, if you knew what I knew, you would believe that this is a fair thing to do. And I can't tell you everything. We early in our time, we tried to do public salaries, but it's hard with salaries. It's not just about salaries. It's salaries and bonuses and stock options and flexibility and how much you get to travel or not get to travel, and on and on and on. Compensation is not one thing. It's a basket of things. It's an equation that every employee sets independently, and because of their life situations, and their life situations change, they may set it differently. And trying to have that 100% transparent, I found very difficult. So hats off to you, Everett. We tried it and failed, but I think it's definitely, you got to 100+ people with it. We only got to about 50 before it became difficult.
The challenge is to get over the idea of being equal, right? I don't have children, so an employee trying to give me childcare credit doesn't do anything. It's not what I need, but I might need something else that somebody who does have kids doesn't need, or whatever. And so I think that we try to create equality when we should be aiming for equity, right? How do we make this our workplace, a place where you can contribute fully? My guess is, and I say this as someone who's spent most of my career as an individual contributor, so you take that with whatever grain of salt. We've for generations worked in environments where management holds power and sway over employees. And there is this power dynamic. I'm the boss, you're not, you're lucky to have a job in this economy. I mean, things that kids today don't want to work. We're hearing all those tropes, right? I think the big surprise comes when we decide that we're going to share power, that we're going to embrace the empowered employee, that employees have way more power now after the pandemic than they had before because they know what they want in their lives. And if we can understand that as leaders, we can use our values, we can use the concept of equity to give people a workplace where they feel like they are valued, where they can contribute, and where they have the power not just to manage their workday, but to contribute fully into the organization. And if we can get ourselves past our we always manage this way, we always led this way, it's a command and control kind of an organization, and we're going to be top down and hierarchical. If we can flip the model, return power to our employees, share power with our employees, and really hear what's needed in a collaborative environment that is rapidly changing, we're going to create workplaces, I think, that are far more adaptable, far more resilient, and really ultimately far more productive. I think that's our goal as leaders.
All right, hey, Stuart.
Yeah.
We're at about the time we need to transition into our individual breakout groups. So first of all, I want to thank you for moderating.
My pleasure.
If you'd like to publish, you did take the able to get the poll working. So if you want to publish that just to see what kind of answers we got here. Looking at it right now, but basically about 10% were 100% virtual, about 14% mostly in person. The rest is hybrid. We're living in a hybrid world. That just confirms that. And that's dynamic. Of the hybrid strategies, 2/3 were 1 to 2 days per week in the office or wherever, a place of work, whereas only 10% was 5 days per week. Hybrid strategies, again, designated days versus employee choice was about 50-50. So we're still figuring that one out, and I think we'll continue. And then whether it's mostly 2/3 we're using different strategies for different groups and different departments. And a third, we're using different strategies for different locations. Some of you have employees around the world. And about a quarter, we're using mostly uniform rules throughout the organization. So thank you. So what we're going to do now, and first of all, please join me in thanking our panelists for taking the time. As you saw, all of them have thought deep. I chose them because they all have thought deeply about this topic. No single person has got all the answers. We are learning from each other. But these folks have really thought about it, and so and are constantly experimenting with different things or different policies, different communication tools, different strategies, and we're learning from each other. So thank you so much. I learned a ton.